Good evening. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for taking the time and for the work of the IPJ to create this special opportunity for us to meet. So I'm going to tell you a short story. It's a story about falling in love with land and with people. And this is the reason I live and work in the Middle East. I come from a tiny community in the south, that tiny purple dot you can see, in a hyper-arid desert where we have just half an inch of average rainfall in a good year. As you can see, it's right between Jordan and Egypt. And keep following the map, if we look up north, you can see the attributes to the Sea of the Galilee, the main source of drinking water. The attributes are shared between Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, following down to the Dead Sea that we share and the Red Sea. I share the same water with my Jordanian neighbors. We drink from the same groundwater. We water our livelihoods, our agriculture, our dates from the same water. Same goes for Palestinians and Israelis in the mountain aquifer. And Shuwaya Derbi, an Ethiopian scholar, said, in Ethiopia, people who share one river basin consider each other as brothers. We drink from one water. We have one blood. And when we look at this map, it starts to become quite clear that we share so many of these natural resources that are transboundary in their nature. So we have to manage them properly. We have to do that together. If we like it or not, it's a matter of survival. Now, environmental peace building is not only about how to share our natural resources and manage them properly. It's about how to minimize the detrimental impact that war and violent conflict has on our environment. It's about where environmental cooperation can actually increase and create political cooperation, such as in the case of Peru and Ecuador, and actually end cycles of violence. Environmental peace building is a growing field. One of the world-renowned scholars specializes in water management, Aaron Wolf from Oregon, studied the history about water disputes and agreements, and he found that between 1948 to 50 years, almost to 2000, there have been 37 violent disputes over water. 30 out of them, guess where they happened? In the Middle East, between Israel and its neighbors. In those same 50 years, 295 agreements were signed between riparian states sharing transboundary water. In those same 50 years, another study shows that between 1950 and 2000, 51,000 Palestinian and Israeli people died as a result of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. 35,000 Palestinians, 16,000 Israelis. So we can see that this land is abundant with conflict and very scarce with natural resources. What are we going to do about it? And in our case, environment can be either a catalyst for conflict or cooperation. Which one will it be? It's up to us. And when I say us, we are a growing movement in the Middle East of environmental peace building. Together with 7 organizations, 2 of which I co-founded, and others include the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies, the Dead Sea and Arava Science Center, a local regional council, and Women Wage Peace. Throughout the years, we have been working with thousands of Palestinians, Israelis, and Jordanians to find a way to live on this land together without killing each other, nor our environment. Before I tell you how we do it, I'll go back a bit to the why, because I told you it's a story about falling in love. When I was 16, I was visiting the United States. I was visiting Alaska and hiking with my brother and father, who's sitting here in this room. And I had a moment in Denali Park where I looked around and I was in such awe of what I saw that a vow just jumped into my heart that I'm going to do everything it takes to protect nature in my life. Soon after, I was growing up in a community in the south of Israel. And soon after, it was my time to serve in the army, like every Israeli boy and girl, men and women. And I grew up with a narrative of serving my country. I was excited to serve my country. I was willing to give my life for this land and for this country. I was looking for a combat position for women. At that time, it didn't exist, so I ended up being an infantry instructor in a classified unit. I was exactly like those ladies you see in the photo. I held the same rifle. I was trained to kill and trained to protect, and I trained soldiers how to use anti-tank, special classified devices. At the end of my army service, I started realizing that I know one side of the story, which I grew up with, and I started becoming curious. After my army service, I worked with the Nature Protection Society of Israel, marking hiking trails. And I walked in the middle of the desert, sometimes alone. One day I encountered 8 men in the middle of the desert, 8 Bedouin Arab men. As a young Jewish woman, who you grow up with this narrative, the first moment is absolute fear. In Hebrew, we say, my heart dropped to my underwears. But I knew it was a very important moment. I just had the feeling. I knew I could choose between fear or trust. The 8 men just slaughtered a chicken for their lunch, and they invited me to come and sit with them. I made the decision to sit and shared food with them, broke bread with them, and kept walking. The next day, I met a Palestinian woman for the first time in my life, a camel herder who invited me to her home in Rashaida to come and taste from the milk of the camel. At that moment, I realized I knew nothing about the people of the land. And I realized I need to learn through my eyes, through my feet. And I started visiting Palestinian communities as well as Jewish settlements, celebrating holidays there, going to harvest olives there, and just learning the land. And walking the trails, visiting the communities, one thing kept shocking me. I couldn't understand. Everywhere I walked, there was trash and pollution. I would mark hiking trails with smelly streams in the color of yellow and fluorescent green, streaming freely in the desert, running into the Dead Sea. And I started becoming angry. I said, are we so busy fighting over this land that we stopped caring for it? How can we call it holy if this is how we treat it, if we trash it? How does this work? And in that moment, I realized what I need to do, which is to combine these two loves of the environment and to the people of the land that I started to get to know. But how? Now we go back to the how. How do we build trust between such animosities? Between people who grew up on both sides thinking that your existence is a threat to my existence? How do we build trust when you could be living in the area of Jerusalem, hiking in nature, and one day somebody can come and just stab you and kill you? This happened to 2 young ladies in the last few months. How do you build trust when you live in Gaza and your house could be bombed, you can lose your children, your family, in a split of a second, your hospitals, your office? How do you build trust when the only option you have to meet each other is through combat, checkpoints, or the news? And how do you build trust that if you want to meet and talk, that is normalization? And yet, I've learned that we have to change the story. I learned personally that I don't want to die for this land. Enough blood has been shed on what people call the Holy Land. I want to live for this land. And I'm not alone. We are many of us changing the narrative of this story that it is good to live for the land, for the people. So how do we do this? We create transformational experiences, because I could come and tell you the statistics and try to convince you and show what I did, but that's not enough. We create transformational experience in which people learn to work together on environmental issues through social entrepreneurship and cooperation. Why we do this? Because it has to be relevant. It has to be relevant to our communities. I live and work in the south. It's the 3 peripheries of all the regions. If I would just invite people to peace and dialogue, it wouldn't work. It has to be relevant to the daily struggles of our communities. And through these experiences, people manage to transform their fear, their indifference, their commitment, and their extreme points of view. And we don't stop with working with communities. We work within one. First of all, we look at the inner patterns of conflict. We work with each other, we work with the environment, and with the communities. This is an example of a project in which a community in Jordan identified an environmental hazard of this wool being thrown to the streets in the shedding season of the lamb. And this wool has become an environmental hazard, polluting water sources and the streets. And together they decided with Ahmed, who you can see here at the bottom, to transform that wool into a product through her traditional knowledge that has been lost in Jordan, to turn it into yarn and later on to products that a shared women cooperative, Jordanian and Israeli, work together and create products. And we have another example in which We have an ecotourism business, transboundary ecotourism of Palestinian, Israelis, and Jordanians working together. These are just 2 out of at least 14 projects out of one USAID-supported project that we finished last year, a 3-year-long process. Our processes are usually a year, 2, or 3, and the Arava Institute includes actual living together for students who study environmental studies for semester 2 or a master's program. And we don't stop with our community work because we know it's not enough. Our work informs policy, informs decision-making by these success stories. People see that what we're doing is working. So we approach people to encourage these, to incorporate these narratives into track 2, into mediation, environmental agreements on climate change, on water management. And I personally do a PhD in hoping to inform policy as well on this exact same topic. And we're enjoying the fruits of our work by people approaching us. Our communities are not waiting for the next big fund. They're actually coming to us with ideas, and our job is to matchmake and to find the partners, to find the funding. And that shows that our strategy of project-based learning, our methodology is working. And I want to leave you with 2 last things. One is, people ask me all the time, what can we do when there's so much overwhelming conflict, so much environmental destruction? What do we do with all this? Where do we choose? Where do we put our efforts? And what I can recommend and say that, in contrast to our consumerism patterns of consuming news and following the headlines, and whenever a conflict area is out or a social justice area is off the headlines, we forget about it, make a relationship with it. Choose one local social issue, one local conflict, one international one. Keep in touch with it. Know somebody from that area. Because those deep and specific and long-term relationships are what make the difference. And I pray that we find the way. I know that when we, my generations and the young ones that I work with, when we are the ones who can lead and our hearts are in the right place, we protect what we love. So if I've learned to work and love with the environment and with Palestinians, Jordanians in the Middle East, the reality of our politics can look different. And my prayer is that our heart does not shut down from all of the pain and the anguish we see around us, that we find these small and daily actions that we can take to make a difference. And I feel that every land is holy. What makes it holy is how we take care of it and what kind of relationship we have with it. Not only the history, the important history that happened on a land, but its future. And its future is up to us right now. So thank you very much.